It's really exciting to create projects and to see them go into the world, but the things that you look back on that really will matter are the relationships that you forge along the way and the energy you derive from those relationships. And so you have to look after the people around you. Hello, everybody. I'm Marius DeVries. I'm a music producer and a songwriter and a composer. I started off as a keyboard player and a programmer before moving more into record production in the mid-90s. The first movie I worked on was Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, which I co-scored with Nellie Hooper and Craig Armstrong. I then went on to music direct Baz's next film, which was Moulin Rouge, and that sort of got me into specifically the world of the film musical, leading up to my involvement a couple of years ago in Damien Chazelle's La La Land, where I was the executive music producer. I started playing very young. My father was a musician and he got me into piano lessons as soon as my feet could reach the pedals. I studied voice because I was a chorister at St Paul's Cathedral in London. And that was a great basic musical education. A lot of theory was bashed into me in those years. And then by the time I hit my teens, I'd seen the inside cover of Rick Wakeman's Six Wives, and I knew I wanted to be surrounded by synthesizers. And then I'd heard Diamond Dogs, so I had kind of an idea of the musical direction I might take, and so that changed everything and led me onto the path that I'm on now. Electronic music became my main hobby, I guess you would say, in my teens. I managed to get an early Moog synth thanks to a generous godfather when I was 15 or 16. And I kind of always had that with me. But a few years after that, I left college with a degree, but no fixed plans. And I think I had no fixed plans kind of on purpose. It had a sort of inevitability to it that my hobby would expand to fill that vacuum. So it took a while, but I got a job in a music shop in London and I hit the audition rounds. And after a couple of years of not really getting anywhere fast, I got hired by a lovely band of people called the Blow Monkeys, who took me around the world on tour and showed me the ropes. I guess that was in around 1986. Spent a few years touring, sort of decided that the touring life wasn't really for me in the long term. So started focusing more on studio work, and that was what led to a lot of work as a session keyboard player and a session programmer, and eventually into record production. Back in the 90s, it was a really exciting time for the record industry and for making records. But in common with just about everybody who was making music at the time, I had half an eye on the world of film soundtracks and film scores, and I thought, I'd like to do that one day. It was a kind of appearance out of nowhere of Baz Luhrmann with his idea for what would become the Romeo and Juliet film, which gave me the rare and lucky chance to actually do that. That turned out to be the perfect project for me, although it also felt very much like being thrown in at the deep end. But Baz really took a chance on us, and that movie very much set the tone for the years to come. Right place, right time, I guess. You know, it's really hard to kind of define a pre-scripted path that one can take to get into this world, because I think everyone's story is different. You have to be like water and flow in the direction that you need to flow in the moment. As I mentioned, I had a pretty rigorous musical training as a child, but I didn't train formally after that. Those basics stuck with me and were a good foundation for what I've ended up doing. And the rest, which is basically everything apart from classical music, was self-taught. I sort of picked it up along the way, but in terms of the path, it's just a question of having an instinct and an eye open for opportunity, which can come from the most unexpected directions. Obviously, there's a big difference between making a record and creating a film score, because in the former case, the music is kind of the ultimate goal of the process, and in the second case, the music plays a supportive role to the meaning and the needs of the picture. There's a kind of shifting in priorities that defines the difference between those two processes. But the main thing they have in common is the importance of listening. listening when you're working with an artist to understand what they're trying to say and to help them to do that. And with a film, listening to what the director has to say about what he or she is trying to do. They're trying to understand their goals in order to be able to do the best job you can. In the next stage, and this is common to both disciplines, having understood what it is you're trying to do, sitting quietly for a while and just listening to your inner voice until something starts to emerge compositionally or production-wise, or in terms of a keyboard sound which feels right for the project. And you can spend a lot of time just sitting and waiting for that to happen, and then you have to learn to recognize it when it does. When a fish is bitten, then you have to reel it in. So it's a bit like fishing, and it's a bit like poker. There's a lot of waiting involved. It's been a long relationship with Korg. As a young teenager, spending time in musical instrument shops to the point where we would get thrown out for having spent too much time there. I remember getting my fingers on some of the very early Korg synthesizers. The first one I owned was an MS-20, which I absolutely loved. And a little later, I was lucky enough to get hold of an MS-50, which, God, I wish I had not sold that. That was one of my worst synthesizer collection decisions of my life. That's late lamented. The MS-20 lives on in the mini one that I have now. A little later, the M1 was used hugely in my work in the late 80s. And the Wave Station was a favorite, which made a very obvious and starring appearance on Bjork's song Human Behavior. I loved The Prophecy, which I still have. That was way ahead of its time, kind of the first affordable, maybe even the first commercially available physical modeling synth. And then most recently, I've had a long relationship with the Kronos workstations, just grown used to having them at the center of things in terms of a really good feeling master keyboard with lots of useful controllers. I probably use about 5% of its functionality as a synth, but I've got 3 of them, sort of one in every studio. What is that? That's kind of a 30-year relationship. Successful marriage. I always try to take the time to talk to people who want to break into the world of film music, because I kind of like being reminded of how it was for me. It's a given that you're wanting to do this because you kind of have no choice, because it's a mission that life has given you. It's not the sort of career you take up because it sounds kind of interesting, which also predicates a deep love of music as a form of expression, which you have to take care of. And once you get started and you get busy, you really have to look after what it was that made you fall in love with music in the first place. As I mentioned earlier, I can't overstate the importance of listening to the people you work for and with. And then just always to remember that there's a lot of luck involved, to try and remember that in the long term, luck evens out. The more you do something, the fairer the outcome is. Some things are going to work and some things are not going to work. But if you try and make the right decisions as often as you can, in the end, things tend to work out. Which is also to say, don't invest emotionally too much in the performance, in the outcome of any given project. You have to invest in ultimately in your own satisfaction with the job you do. And finally, it's really important, and the more I've done this, the more I've understood this, to approach the whole endeavor with a spirit of generosity, both to those you work with and perhaps especially to those who work for you.